Andy, thanks a lot for your talk on qualitative data. I really liked all the examples you showed about what you can actually do with qualitative data and all the different angles you can have to look at a certain phenomenon or a certain topic. And it was also very nice to see your own personal Seinfeld project. How did you choose which aspect of the Seinfeld episodes you were going to collect and record? Because you have a lot of choices, especially when you think of all the qualitative aspects that Seinfeld has. Like, you could look at the colors in a scene, or you could look at the clothes people are wearing, or I don't know, you could look at anything basically. So how did you make a choice? Yeah, which qualitative aspect you found it interesting to record?
Yeah. Well, I think and it's not just unique to qualitative stuff. We always need to focus. We always need to establish some notion of editorial thinking. I know that is a topic we'll be covering later in the series, but for me, it's always the starting point of a question that reflects my interest, my curiosity, the thing that I want to know about. And unless you start off with something, and it can be very open, it can be very initially very wide and ambiguous in some respects, but you've got to start somewhere with a sense of why are you even doing this? And especially when the project that you're going to do involves such a huge amount of data collection from a primary source, like watching a video. So the thing for me in that project was, there were loads of things I could have done, and literally endless ratings, awards. As you said, the kind of colour palette of the show. Is it a close-up, or is it a sort of far-away shot? Loads of things. But I was interested in almost the kind of mechanics of how each episode is pieced together. How do the writers and the producers use their resources, which is people, the cast, it's locations for the sets, and it's the dialogue. I mean, the whole point of a sitcom is the comedy. So who gets the laughs? How do we sort of measure almost the performance? And I guess with my football head on, I'm always thinking about the idea of looking at this through the lens of analytics, almost the performance of a sitcom. So that was my inquiry to understand as I mentioned, the kind of the rhythm, which was the sort of temporal dimension, but then the texture, this kind of overlaying of different materials, almost instruments, that then result in this sitcom. So and along the way, don't get me wrong, there were lots of temptations to collect this other thing and to collect more of that thing, and maybe to do that again because it's not detailed enough. But I think for something like this, especially when it was about repeating a process 176 times over, you have to just say, right, that's good enough. I keep sitting down thinking, right, I've got an hour, I'm going to draw something. And then 45 minutes later, I'm still thinking, what shall I draw? What's interesting? And you kind of just get caught up in this, I have to find the perfect object or the perfect scene. And sometimes just do a cup that's just there, or just draw your laptop, and it's, I kind of sympathize with that idea of, what's interesting. You try to set the bar too high, and sometimes just make it trivial, and it might just unlock some thinking.
Yeah. Did you stick to your plan all the time, or did you sometimes change, like, okay, but this is interesting enough after watching 3 episodes and collecting data after 3 episodes? Did you change something in your initial?
To be honest, there were maybe just 1 or 2 very small revisiting of an episode that had been done once, just to sort of make sure that we could actually just maybe tease apart one counting phenomena. But otherwise, we just had to have that discipline to say, look, even if we now regret something or we wish we'd done something differently, consistency at this point was more important than precision or perfection. And I think you have to live with that. And I think, you know, if we take the broader view of qualitative topics and qualitative data, it cannot be perfect. It never will be perfect. It never will be objective. And I think as long as you pursue consistency and you establish your counting rules with the readers and say, look, this is the rationale, you know, come with me, you know, accept the imperfections, but just come along with me. And hopefully it still merits interest and still gives people the answer to the question that set the whole thing off in motion.
Yeah.
And are you not afraid to have blind spots then? Like things you weren't aware of at all, and then you're collecting, and in the end you think, oh my God, I see something now that really doesn't add up. Or
well, yeah, I mean, looking back, one of the things that I do kind of regret is that, I mean, it's a small level thing, but we grouped together a bunch of characters into a group that we called friends or acquaintances. And looking back now, as you see the development of the stories across the seasons, you know, some of those people who were bundled into a group, actually, I would have liked to preserve them as individuals and, you know, see more about their individual sort of development across the plot. But, I mean, again, this is just something you have to live with. And I think one of the benefits of that consistency is, and again, the broader point about the project, which was a learning process, is to be able to look back and reflect on that and to learn from it next time and to recognize that this is probably the first time I've done something of this nature, of this size. I'm going to make mistakes and just, blind spots, just live with them and acknowledge them perhaps.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a very good recommendation for our students as well, that you don't, it doesn't have to be perfect, like it cannot be perfect actually. But by pursuing accuracy and consistency, you can still get a product that you're happy with. Yeah,
exactly. And I think
meaning at least. Yeah.
That's right. And I think there's another important point here, which is again perhaps the biggest point to make about qualitative data, because when I've been looking at this topic, and it's something that's been sort of floating around my head for years now, but I've kind of got ever closer to the idea that everything originally is qualitative. But what's happened is that the way that we've developed over decades instruments and mechanisms to collect data, that converts qualitative actions into quantitative data. It counts things. You know, if you buy something off Amazon, it's not a person who's writing down that that's happened. It's just automated. And we now see the data that you would get from Amazon transactions as quantitative and maybe categorical and timestamps. But if you were buying something from a shop 100 years ago, you know, someone would write it down. And I think it's therefore important when people are dealing with qualitative source data or source topics, shall we say, that there isn't a secret source. There isn't a secret separate bunch of methods that you need to use to visualize that data. The critical thing is this intervention as you take that messy, complex, chaotic, gooey, sketchy concept and you have to turn it into categories and you have to turn it into counts of things and moments and instances. And then you visualize that stuff. And so your qualitative inquiries stand and fall on your collection methods, but also this intervention, this transformation stage. It's not that the visualizations are somehow different for your work than anybody else's work. And I think that's a really important learning point for me, I think, in terms of this, perhaps dispelling the myth that somehow qualitative and quantitative need to be very separated topics in data viz.
Yeah, so it's really important to think of the counting method or the collection method. Yeah.
Well, that's right. And once again, looking back to this particular project, the Seinfeld project, I mean, if there was a way for me to automate the collection of this, and you know, this would probably involve some high-level programming to somehow detect moments of laughter and, you know, recognizing from imagery who's in the scene. But if that was possible, then the whole prospect speeds up. And therefore, you can tweak and modify the collection method to make it easier to have gone through one round and thought, hang on, I would have preferred to count this thing in that way, or maybe separate those categories. Right, let's do it again. And you tweak the code. So if these things can be automated, then it's more possible to not have those blind spots as a permanent blind spot. You can improve it. And I guess with certain, if we're looking at qualitative data through things like transcript analysis, text analysis, there are lots of tools now that will speed up the analysis of language and sentiments and keywords so that you don't have to get it right once and once only. You can keep modifying and tweaking as you learn more about the contents that you're working with. I think everything's subjective ultimately. Even if you've got even if you've got a neat table of quantities and categories, you are still making loads of choices about what to include, what to exclude, what to show, how to show it, what to emphasize, what to downplay. And perhaps if we kind of flip the question, perhaps there's a danger that as readers of charts based on quantitative data, we don't recognize the subjectivity that goes into those things. And we automatically assume that because they look statistical and precise and very sort of sober in their design, that we just think, well, this is the truth. This is very authoritative. This is no one's modified the data. No one's done anything to this. This is the absolute truth. So I think that's perhaps the bigger problem, that we always just put this word subjectivity on qualitative stuff. That's not fair. We don't always do that. Not everyone does that. But as a balance, you put more subjectivity on qualitative, and perhaps we just accept, or we assume that there's more objectivity in quant stuff, and that's just not the case, really.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
And actually, just to expand on that, once again, the data that you've got that's quant, well, it's come from somewhere. Someone's collected that data. Someone's computerized the collection of that data. Someone's brought it out of a database with a query or an export. So you got to think about the whole story.
Yeah.
Whole story, yeah.
So because I think this whole project is touching upon this also, because we all the students come from, like, I don't know, 10 different countries and very different cultures. But if you go out for example, and you live in Bandung, Indonesia, and you go out and you start counting things or start looking at things on the street, you might see your regular stuff, or it might be that you have a blind spot for all the things you see daily, for example.
Absolutely.
But if I would like walk in the streets of Bandung, then I would see totally different stuff, right? I mean, the point I'm making is that, it's very hard, I think, for people to be totally objective. And there's always, if you don't want to, there's always some sort of subjectivity, right?
Well, that's right. I mean, we were chatting before the recording about weather and ice and coldness and snow, and if you were looking at that weather condition as somebody who prefers warmth, you would say that's bad. I don't like that. That's a negative situation. Yeah. If you're an ice skater looking forward to getting on the canals of Amsterdam, then fantastic. This is fun. This is fun times. I've been waiting for this. So, everything is through our own biases, our own kind of cultural lens, and I think it's one of those things that you kind of have to force yourself to recognize those biases. Even if other people alert you to it, you still are very kind of reluctant sometimes to think, no, I'm not biased. I don't have a perspective. I don't have a viewpoint that's different to others. I'm an objective observer of life. Well, it's not the case. And you have to kind of really sort of consciously step back and think, hang on, maybe I do bring those. And I think, to maybe again just sort of turn that more into a positive thing than perhaps a negative thing or a barrier, obstacle. I think the most important thing is recognizing it, but not to say that that means that we should not do these things. You know, this should not prevent us seeking to collect data because we fear biases. It shouldn't stop us doing analysis because we're worried that we might put a certain slant on it and that's not objective. No, still do all that stuff, but just maybe hold your hand up and say, look, you know, in the footnotes, these are the assumptions. These are the things that I've done with this data. These are the assumptions that I've made. And then people can judge that themselves and make their own sense of, okay, this person said this, and it seems reasonable for them to say this, but they've also explained some issues with the data, which means I will take this with a pinch of salt and not make some staggering decisions based on this alone.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and as well, we can, you showed the example as well of some visualizations where the visual rendering or the visual choices were also a bit sketchy. Well, the smell map has that certainly.
Yeah, that sort of fluidy,
fluid shape, so you cannot exactly see. But as well,
identifying politicians' faces. Yes.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. What I love about that piece in particular is I can't remember if this is true, so I might be making this up, but I believe that what we see as the representation of that data is literally how it was collected.
Yeah, that's typical. Yeah.
So I love the efficiency of that you just show as it was collected.
Exactly.
But yeah, and you know, and going back to the smell map, I mean, it's horrible, you know, a hospital smell map, but the representation looks like smells. You know, if we imagine, you know, how Disney would present smells, you know, that's kind of how you would imagine it.
Sure.
And I think this last few years perhaps has seen this greater liberation amongst visualizers to not have everything in a bar chart. And again, it's easy to be negative about the bar charts and the statistical methods, but it's about recognizing the repertoire of options and when to use them. So there's a time and place to use bar charts. Of course there are, most times, frankly. But there's a time and place for more of this gist, this sense of sketchiness, this way of showing data that is inherently imperfect, inherently imprecise. Well, let's not show that in a bar chart because it gives the impression of precision when it does not exist. So floaty, sketchy, gooey, I think this sort of extended language of portraying uncertainty is a really healthy place for the field to be going in.
Yeah. It's like impressionism in data.
That's right. Exactly. That's a great way to look at it. Yeah.